Hey, good morning, Discovery. Welcome to Church at Home. So glad that you're hanging out with us today. Man, I really hope that you enjoyed last week. I know I did. Just gathering around the computer screen or the TV, however you're watching this, and just knowing that there are other people around there watching it and worshiping together. I think it's amazing. And so I'm excited for today for sure. And so I don't know if this is just me, but I feel like my routine of life has become just sporadic. And I just feel like my whole life has changed. Like the scheduling and what to expect has changed. And one thing that I've noticed that I'm doing a lot of now, especially within the shelter in place, is I'm watching a lot of movies, right? I'm watching a lot of TV, but it's not just me. It's like my whole family. So like we've been doing this since we've been in shelter in place. We end the day with watching some type of family movie, something that is, like you can just be proud of, that you're not tampering or tainting the innocence of your kids. And so that's kind of been what we've been doing every night. So the other night, 2 nights ago, we were watching this amazing movie. I don't remember what the movie is, but it was innocent, it was fun, it was lighthearted. And then all of a sudden, we were watching it on YouTube Live, or YouTube TV. And so, if you're unfamiliar with that, what it does is it'll play a movie, but then it has sponsored ads, right, or commercials. And so we're watching this movie, and then all of a sudden, this ad comes on for this new show. I'm not gonna share the name, but this new show, and here's the premise of this new show: is struggling musicians, struggling artists. They come together under one roof, and the goal is for them to find true love. Okay. And so like this ad comes on, we're like eating our popcorn, right, with extra butter. Don't judge, butter's yummy. And so we're watching this, ad comes on, right? And then all of a sudden there's like this scene with this guy and this girl, and they're like awkwardly making out, right? And so instantly my wife and I, like, we grab our kids and we cover their eyes, and we're like, don't look, you don't need to see this, it's gross, they're not married, right? Just cover your eyes. And so we're covering their eyes, and then all of a sudden, like, we think we're doing a good job, then the narrator starts talking about, like, and this is steamy romance with sexy blah blah, and we're like, oh my gosh. And so now we're not just covering their eyes, but like we're trying to cover the ears too. And we do, I don't know if you've ever done this in your parent, you're like trying to make noise so they can't hear, like talking louder. And it was just this moment of my wife and I just no, this is not okay. And my kids are like, Mom, Dad, y'all are weird, right? You're freaking out for nothing. But I'm telling you this because I was thinking about this. I was thinking about this moment. I was thinking about the ability, or at least Vanessa and I trying to protect our kids. I began thinking about this, and you'll probably agree with me when I say this, but we tend to protect things that we value. Have you ever noticed that? Like, let me say it this way. We guard things that have value to us. We all value different things, right? So some of us, we value wealth. Some of us, we value relationships. There's some of us that value power. But no matter what it is that you value, if you value it, there's a good chance that you're going to try and protect it. You're going to try to guard it. Now, I was thinking about this idea of guarding things that we value. And I was reminded of a passage that we read in Proverbs chapter 4. Now, Proverbs, majority of it was written by this man named Solomon. Solomon is known as the wisest man to have ever walk the face of the earth. God asked Solomon one day, he said, Solomon, ask me for anything and you'll have it. And Solomon's like, I just want wisdom, right? And so God gave him wisdom. And so Solomon in Proverbs chapter 4, he lets us in on what he sees as something that is valuable that you and I should guard. And so he writes this in Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 23. He says, above all else, guard your heart, for from it flows everything. Let's think about that real quick. Solomon says that above all else. Now let's put that into context. For the previous 22 verses, Solomon has been giving us amazing instruction, amazing wisdom tidbits, amazing nuggets for you and for me. And he's been telling us these nuggets for 22 verses. And then he gets to verse 23. And he says this, above all else. In other words, Solomon is like, hey, I know what I've told you up until this point has been great. It's been good. But he's like, lean in, because I'm about to tell you the most important, the most valuable thing that you can ever do. And so I'd imagine as the reader, they're just at the edge of their seat. They're waiting to hear what Solomon is about to say. And he says this, above all else. He says, guard your heart. Protect your heart. Now, he wasn't talking about the anatomy, the heart that pumps blood. But in fact, the Hebrew word actually implies the innermost, the inner being of a person, the thoughts, the will, and the emotions of a person. And that's what Solomon is referring to. He's like, hey, guys, above all else, guard your thoughts, your emotions, your will. He says, guard your inner man. The sense that Solomon is letting us know that there is value in the invisible. There's value in the things that we can't see. We see this in Judges about a story involving a man named Samson. Now, I'm sure you've heard of Samson before, and we're going to talk about the part of Samson that I'm sure you know of. But before Samson was even born, in Judges chapter 13, God visits Samson's mom and is like, you're going to have a son. And this son that you are going to have, you're not going to cut his hair. It's going to be the source of his strength. And God continues on and he says, but here's what I really want you to know. That Samson is going to deliver my people from their enemy. In other words, God is letting Samson's mom know, hey, even before Samson was born, I am placing inside of him purpose. I'm placing deep down in his innermost being, I am placing purpose, something valuable inside of Samson. Now, I want to pause real quick, because if you've been to Discovery for any stretch of time, you know that I believe without a shadow of a doubt that you and I were born and were created for a purpose. That before we were even born, God placed something valuable inside of you. He's placed something valuable inside of your heart, your thoughts, your will. Like there's something important and that's valuable that he's imparted to you. And when we understand that God has placed something valuable inside of us, it almost makes sense now why Solomon is saying, above all else, guard your heart. Because God placed something inside of you that's of value, that has meaning, and that has purpose. So maybe you're like, John, we are in the middle of a pandemic. Why are you talking to me about purpose? But can I propose to you this morning that how you guard your heart in this season will determine what your heart looks like in the next season. See, let me put it this way. We live in this season that we're in now with the shelter in place and this virus that has just like taken the attention of the world. And we've allowed ourselves to be fed with news that, rightfully so, causes anxiety, fear, and worry. And what's happening is that with social media and with news, maybe with friends, relationships, like, because we're not guarding our heart, we're soaking in on these outlets that are just constantly pushing fear, constantly pushing fear and anxiety into our minds and in our hearts. And so all of a sudden we're sitting here and because we haven't guarded, protected the inner man, the thing that is so valuable that God has placed inside of us, because we're not guarding it, all of a sudden it overtakes us. It overtakes our thoughts. It overtakes our speech. And Solomon, remember, he said, guard your heart above all else. He says, because from it flows everything else. And so what we're allowing inside of us, the fear and the worry, the news, the care, when we allow it inside of us, and when we're not guarding it, all of a sudden my actions become tainted with fear. And all of a sudden my words become tainted with fear. And then now all of a sudden everything about me, because I wasn't guarding my heart, because I wasn't guarding my inside, rather than living as if I have something valuable inside of me, rather than living as if I have a purpose, and rather than living as if God has placed something so special inside of me that has the ability to affect the world, now all of a sudden I'm living through the lens of me. And all of a sudden, when we're not careful, and we don't guard our heart, we don't guard the innermost parts of who we are, all of a sudden, my whole world begins to unravel. And now I'm not living like a person that has purpose and that has value, but I'm living as a person who is full of fear and worry and anxiousness. In fact, Samson, as we fast forward through his life, we actually see Samson, and just like maybe some of us, he doesn't do the best of job with guarding his heart. See, we're now fast forwarding to Judges chapter 16, and here is Samson. His paths cross with this lady named Delilah. And what you need to know about Delilah is that Delilah's thirsty, y'all. She's all about herself. She's all about how she can be promoted and how her her status can be elevated. And so we see that because she's approached by the Philistine. She's approached by the enemy of Samson. And they're like, yo, Delilah, we will pay you this much amounts of money if you can get Samson to tell you the secret of his strength. And she's like, sure, I can do that. And as you read Judges chapter 16, Delilah, she actually tries 3 times to get the secret of Samson's strength. 3 times, she tries 3 times. And all 3 times, Samson, he does an okay job with guarding his heart, guarding his purpose, guarding his innermost. I mean, he does okay, but what we discover is that even the strongest man can only play defense for so long. And we read in Judges chapter 16 and verse 16, with such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it. So he told her everything. The text says that she kept nagging him every day, day after day, so much so that eventually he's like, okay, woman, leave me alone. I'm going to tell you everything. And he does. He tells her the secret of his strength. And here's what I want us to see is that Samson was able to deflect, to guard, to play defense only for so long until he broke. Here's what we got to understand when it comes to you and me guarding our heart, is that guarding our heart is not just defense, but it's also learning to play offense. Here's what I mean. Like, we can't, when we guard our heart, it's not just a matter of us like blocking, standing there as ding, 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 things are trying to penetrate our shield. That's not just guarding, that's part of it. But eventually, you and I, we got to get to the place where we can begin to either remove ourselves from the situation or those things that are trying to taint us, to remove those things from our lives. But eventually, no matter which way it is, you and I, we got to learn to remove things from our life that jeopardizes the value that God's placed inside of us. And so here we are. We're at this place where we are removing things from our lives. In an act of guarding our heart, we're removing things from our lives. But it doesn't just stop there. In fact, Paul writes in Ephesians chapter 4, he says that we can't give the devil a foothold. So this picture that Paul is painting is that there are things that we need to remove from our life, because if we don't, it gives the enemy an opportunity, access to us. And he says that we got to remove those things from our life. And so once we remove these things from our life as a way of guarding our heart, then what? What do we do next? The natural response, when I remove something, I now have to replace it with something. We actually see this happening in a letter that the Apostle Paul writes to the church in Philippi. Apparently they're in a situation and they're in a time period where they're full of anxiousness and they're full of fear, kind of like we are today. And the Apostle Paul writes a letter to them in Philippians chapter 4, verse 6 through 8. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Okay, so did you catch that? If we're going to remove things from our life, then we have to replace it. And so if I'm going to remove anxiety, if I'm going to remove sources that continue to just pour into me, things that make me fearful, then I'm going to replace it. Watch this. Paul says, with the peace of God. And I love this because Paul, it's as if he knows his reader, his audience are going to be like, Paul, but you don't understand what I'm going through. You don't understand my situation. Because Paul, you don't understand how big of an issue that I have. Or Paul, you don't understand what I'm dealing with. There's no way that this peace of God can help me. And it's as if Paul understands that, because he says, peace that surpasses all understanding. So this ability that you and we have access to this peace that doesn't make sense up here. Like, I don't understand how his peace works, but I do know, Paul is saying, that we have access to this type of peace. And so I think just a practical application for this is that when I begin to feel overwhelmed, and when I begin to be succumbed by fear and confusion and worry, that I pause, I remove myself, and I allow the peace of God to overwhelm me. And I think the easiest way for that to take place, I've said it before, is put on some worship music, pause, and just sit there, just relax under the presence and the peace of God. My prayer for you this morning is that you would guard your heart. You would guard the innermost being of who you are. You would guard it and you would protect it in this season. What God has placed inside of you should be cherished and should be protected, because in the next season, He needs that purpose, that value that He's placed inside of you to shine, to make a difference. And so this morning, as we close, I just want to pray with you. I want to pray that God would give you the strength to identify things in your life that can be tainting your heart, your thoughts, emotions, your will, and that He would give you strength to remove it, but also give us wisdom to replace it.